Yo, Vin. Thanks for your message, man. Meant a lot. How's everybody doing? I'm just gonna send this to.
Hello.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning to you too. How's it
How's
going?
it going?
Um, you first.
Okay, so how's it going for me? I am on 4 hours of sleep. I woke up at 8, and then I've been having, because I do personal branding through LinkedIn, so I had one-on-one sessions from 9 till 4 o'clock, and then I started the live sessions at 4:30.
Nice. And all of this on 4 hours of sleep. I'm not even going to ask you about your coffee intake right now, because if
I
that
don't
was
drink
me, I'd,
coffee.
what? What are you running on? Don't say
Energy.
kindness. Don't say kindness. Okay.
I should have said kindness, actually.
Don't say I'm good. I'm okay. Just starting the day really on this end. Um, Read some news, the usual. So I'm pretty good. Excited to do this because I was watching Senel's also before I came on, and I've been popping in and out over all the discussions you've had over the past. You've had quite a few. I just did the numbers. Like I think you've had like 5 to 6 per day, or even
Yeah,
more.
six
I
per
think.
day.
Yeah, yeah. So quite a large number. But yeah, been good, been good. Thanks for having
You
me. But
officially have a number to you as well. I think you're number 89.
oh, nice, nice.
But besides the
That-
number, you are so much more. Just like Sana, I am not even going to try and explain all the things you have done. I'm going to try and leave that to you. But right now,
Okay.
you are an activist in your own right. You have your own blog that you write on Medium as well. Recently, you covered stories of COVID and curfew situations and how people are coping. But
Mhm.
you've been on so many panels. You've moderated panels, but you've been on panels regarding sexual harassment, women inequality, all of those things. You have also worked for the UN as well and represented Sri Lanka.
Mhm.
Um, Shisha, please tell us all about
Okay.
you, how Oxford is going. Please.
Okay, so I don't like talking about myself, so I'm just going to be very brief about that. Above all, I'm a student right now, so I'm studying as a graduate student, doing my master's here. Um, it's been, I think, around 6 months into my master's program when all of this, well, when all hell broke loose. I mean, if that's the best way to say it, really. Oxford's been good. Oxford's been great. As much as I love being very active and doing field work and being involved in like projects and that sort of thing, um, I'm also a huge nerd. So being in Oxford meant, you spend at least 5 to 6 hours a day, like in a library, studying, reading, doing all that kind of things. But now suddenly that's completely twisted because libraries are closed. Access to books is still possible online. It's still very possible, but it's also restrictive in certain ways. You can't have study sessions with friends. You can't go outside and sit in a park and read for too long. Um, so my Oxford experience, I know when I say all of that, it sounds very bland and very bleak, but it's only made it even more exciting for me personally because when I talk to friends or when I talk to people back at home, I'm like, oh, this is going wrong, this is happening. The prime minister's in hospital. The UK is just like the situation is so tense, but at the same time, like deep down inside, I'm like, this is kind of cool. Like everything is topsy turvy, and here I am, just stuck in my room with like books and the internet. And it's kind of like that post-apocalyptic movie that you kind of picture yourself in. I mean, I'm sure we've all done that thing where we've all thought, what if shit goes down, and then what do we do? Like, who are we going to be in that position? And suddenly I find myself in that position. So I'm low-key living a movie right now. But obviously that's not without realizing the seriousness of the situation, obviously. So
Of course,
I'll
it's
make my
just like,
I'll make my jokes about it, but it's a very serious situation. Yeah.
oh no, absolutely. Like for me, like I'm quite the introvert. Like as soon as like I'll be social when I need to be social, and I will talk my ass off when I need to talk my ass off. But at the same time, when I come home, I'm just like, don't talk to me. Just leave
Yeah.
me alone. Like I am not in a position to talk to anyone anymore. And like now it's just like, hey, I don't need to talk to anybody. And then I saw this live show, and I'm just like, think again, Sharon.
No, it's interesting because I keep getting calls from home and I'm like, why are you calling me so much? And they're like, well, you're there alone. Like, there's nobody in the house. And I'm just like, that's great. Like, you have no idea how happy I am to be in my little. Ironically, I live in a basement. Like, my room is a basement room. So I'm literally a troll in the basement right now and, totally loving it, embracing that hermit life. But yeah, yeah.
Amazing. So just to get more context as well, what exactly are you studying in Oxford? Is it something that you want to pursue as a career, or is it just like a stepping stone that you're studying for now to get you to other places?
Mhm. So that's pretty interesting. I'm going to connect that with what you asked in the beginning about a little bit about what I do, because if people just joined and they
Connect
don't
away.
know, so that'll put some context. Um, so I have a background in international relations and also in English literature, which is what I did as an undergraduate. And somehow, in terms of what I do, in terms of work, I have been involved in communications and media, but I've also done, advocacy work for gender um, and that sort of thing, which I have thoroughly enjoyed doing. So the past 1.5 to 2 years, I was very involved in gender work, creating campaigns both online and offline.
You did
And
communication for Oxfam as well, right?
yeah, I did communications for Oxfam. So we did some solid work. And aside from that, I was also part of a team that worked on climate change, risk reduction, and resilience. So there was a lot of groundwork that was covered. I was always in the field. I got to speak to some wonderful people in the community, and that honestly, that really enriched my experience as I was, continuing my career. Wasn't really expecting to do a master's. My master's is in politics and international studies. Um, wasn't really expecting to do it. Somehow came around. And now you know, what I'm kind of doing is I've had a certain amount of grassroots level experience, like field work, and I've seen the actual situation. And I get to examine how all of that happens from a policy perspective. So I get to see both sides of the story, how decisions are made, why decisions are made on a top level, and how it translates to actual people and problems, within
Amazing.
communities. Um, and the interesting part is there are so many disconnects. Like the disconnects are you cannot ignore them, and people are aware that there is a disconnect. And that is where communities and people like you and students, academics, social service workers come in to kind of balance that very obvious disconnect and make things a little better. So it's a wonderful ecosystem that we're all existing in. And what makes this situation, the pandemic, even more um, interesting is that all of us are in this, and all of those systems have to start functioning in this. And then you see the extent of how all of these start popping up when you have a crisis situation like this. So all the loopholes, all the shortcomings, all the issues are suddenly just out there, and you can see them clear as day. And that's when we need people to come in and kind of fill in the blanks. And you're like, oh, this isn't working, we need to do something about that. Or you haven't been accountable for XYZ, it's time that you start thinking differently. um, so being a student who's studying policy and just the international systems during a time like this is really, it's been absolutely eye-opening. And that's why I joke about being here, in this context because I'm living an actual, a real life example. I mean, we see how governments are not responding well enough. We are seeing the shortcomings. We're seeing the problems that come in pandemic situations. And sadly, none of this ought to be new to us or anybody because this has been an issue. People have spoken about the likelihood of pandemics coming up and being the next biggest threat to humankind. But we've been so busy with other things that we haven't really focused on the next big war, so to speak. I hate using the word war because I feel like it's detrimental to other instances that have happened in the past. But this really is a battle of sorts.
It
So it's
is.
a struggle, I'd say. Yeah.
And I think like just to add to that, like Bill Gates did a TED talk 4 years ago saying the next world war is not going to be a war amongst humans, but a war amongst the virus. And now we're literally living it. And it has given him the opportunity to resign from his board position and focus on more uh, pressing issues, to say. But like one of the things that you said, like you said, everyone's been kicked into overdrive. Like everything's out in the open, and then there's policies and there's people and community, and slowly we can see like loopholes being filled and people coming together. But
Mm-hmm.
do you think that it's still too slow? Because there is still a lot of background agenda going on. There's still a lot of money to be lost. There's still I don't want this to be a political discussion. That's not what I'm aiming at this being, because I really don't want to get into that. And it's going to pull up like a heap of discussions that I don't want to get into. But like, what do you think? Do you think it's too slow? Do you think that we're adapting too slow to the current situation because there was so many loopholes and everything was not set up the way it's supposed to be set up?
Um, I mean, yeah, I do agree. I mean, bringing up politics on platforms is always a bit sketchy, so we're not going to do that. But I will say we need to be more responsible as consumers and as citizens to hold people accountable for what they should do and what they shouldn't do. And I'm just going to leave it at that. That's the first thing. Second thing, to answer your question about are we adapting well enough to this situation, I think being blunt, no. And you can't blame people for that because all of a sudden it's like things were going fine. This was a problem that was predominantly in Wuhan, miles and miles away from us. We don't need to worry about it. And suddenly it's our problem. We haven't had time to respond. We haven't had resources. We're not used to this kind of issue. Unlike countries like Korea, for example, South Korea, who have had respiratory problems in terms of viruses spreading around. And they were able to respond to this a lot better than most other countries because they're looking back at their history. They're reevaluating how they responded in the past, right? But there are other countries who haven't had this kind of problem, so they don't know what to do. They don't know how soon they need to respond to it. So no, we're not responding to it properly. And honestly, you can't blame people for that. But at the same time, you need to understand that it will take a couple of weeks, it will take a month at most for people to get used to this. And when I say people, I mean people like you and I within this demographic. We're very lucky to be sitting here having this conversation. We need to acknowledge the fact that we're safe enough to do that. We have that privilege. And it'll take us 2 to 3 weeks to kind of get used to this, staying indoors, having restrictive movement, not being able to go out. But at the same time, this is not the period in which we can baby ourselves, because this is a point where we need to start thinking proactively, and we need to start getting ready for a potential forecast where things are going to be much worse. And what this means is, if you're bored, if you're annoyed that Pizza Hut doesn't deliver, if you're annoyed that you can't bake a cake because you're out of chocolate chip cookies, you need to sit down and reevaluate your stance and
Perspective.
reevaluate yourself. Because those are not priorities right now. They really aren't. They come from a place of privilege. They come from a place of safety. They come from a place where even if you work from home, and even if that's a struggle, you're still going to get your monthly paycheck. And it only adds to the problem. I know this isn't a popular take on it, but a lot of people have been talking about how this affects businesses and how this is going to affect small businesses and so on and so forth. We are going to have problems. It's not going to be as bad as the 2008 crash, maybe not as bad as that, but we definitely are going to be having problems, right? And the solution for that is not to support small businesses by getting takeout on the daily. Okay?
Hmm.
That shouldn't be your solution, right? Because when you order takeout and when these small businesses set up mechanisms during lockdowns, during curfews to deliver food to your house, what you're doing is you're inviting the risk of the virus. It doesn't matter that the person who is delivering the food is wearing gloves and has a face mask, right? You have doctors who are currently working with patients who are wearing 5 layers of clothing, protective clothing, and they're still at high risk. They're still, some of them have passed away, right? And you expect to tell me that your pizza delivery guy is secure enough to
Somehow
give you
protect
food?
this.
No, it isn't. I'm sorry to break this to you, but it really isn't, right? And in this situation, the more people hop on board that bandwagon and say, we're helping them with their jobs, we're helping deliveries happen, we're keeping people in business, you're only extending the amount of days you're going to stick to quarantine. You're only risking the situation to a greater extent, right? And I know it's a bad situation. I know that this means that businesses are going to struggle. It's going to mean that people are not going to have jobs. But this is the time we reevaluate those businesses and we start asking them, why don't they have policies or why don't they have a kind of a safety net in place for situations like this? Sri Lanka is not a country that's new to a curfew. We've had curfews throughout our recent history, right? And we've had shutdowns. Why haven't we implemented a system where we protect our workers? Why don't we have an emergency fund that we implement during these situations, right? This is when we have to start asking these questions. This is when we have to start being accountable for these things, right? Because if you want to, if you want to support your local businesses, great, go ahead, do it. Send them a bank transfer, give them some cash to keep running. Don't order food, don't bring the virus into your houses. People are asymptomatic, right? And your delivery guy could have gone to a house where no one is sick, assumedly, but turns out somebody is, and then they come to your house and bang, what? The virus is transmitting. I mean, if you look at the history of this, when you look at previous pandemics, cities and towns that shut down completely had a lower death rate. And that's because they helped stall the virus until a solution came around. That's what we're all doing right now. We're staying at home, we're making our coffees, we're making our banana bread, we're fighting with our siblings, and we're doing all this because we want to stall the virus. We want to prevent the rapid transmission of it. So adapting is going to be difficult. It's a very difficult pill to swallow, but it is something that we will have to do, whether we like it or not. And I think that's something young people can start to think about. This is not the time to order your Fashion Nova clothes. This is not the time for you to be, wasting money, because that's another thing you have to start thinking about. A lot of people are being laid off because of this situation. People aren't sure if they'll be able to go to work for an extended period of time. You might not get sponsorships. If you work online, you might not get sponsorships. Newspapers are having this problem because they aren't getting an income through adverts anymore, right? So the world system is changing, it's shifting. There's a huge pause that we're going to have to embrace, and we need to toughen up. We really need to toughen up. I'm still a student here, and there are so many other students scattered across the UK, the US, wherever. And it's very uncertain times for us. I can't imagine the students in the US who are asked to leave. Predominantly almost all the universities asked students to leave in the US, if I remember correctly. And I remember
Even
talking to my cousin, yeah, who was studying there. And like the problems are like, how are you going to afford a plane ticket to go back? Will you get a refund for your college accommodation? Not everyone has the same internet connectivity speeds back at home. Will they have the same access? So there are lots of things that we have to start thinking about, and we have to be more forthright with our thinking as well. These are very, very tough situations to be in. So in
yeah,
terms of your question on adaptability, I think we need to start prioritizing. we definitely need to start prioritizing.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that as well because I think I'm subject to that as well because I think it's ignorance from my part because in my mind, I thought I was actually helping businesses. So I've been doing shout outs for like small businesses who need help as well. You
Yeah.
would have seen it on my stories as well. And I'm glad you brought it out because like I feel like now it's like it's like ignorance on my part for not thinking that far ahead in a sense, but we should be thinking that far ahead as well
Well,
because
I mean, yeah, that's the problem. We're not thinking that far ahead because we haven't had the need to think that far ahead. I mean, a couple of months ago, everyone was seeing the videos from Wuhan and they're like, oh my God, the entire city is shut down. How do you think they're managing? This is so terrible. I'm so lucky to be where I am and it's not my problem. Bam. Not even 6 months later, 2, 3 months in, we're in lockdown. Sri Lanka's in a curfew. People are trying to get their online deliveries. We didn't think long term. Do you see what I mean? And
yep,
I mean, it's more to do with I mean, I don't think we should beat ourselves up for it, but it's a prime example of how not thinking in the long term has kind of, distorted the way we respond to things. So what
yep,
happens is panic situation, and everyone's like panic, 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 panic. What can we do within the next few weeks to resolve this? But this is not something that's going to be resolved in a few weeks. Now, you mentioned Bill Gates' TED Talk, right? Everyone's been quoting that because um, obviously it's Bill Gates. So we're going to hold him accountable for that kind of thing. Um, but he's not the only one who has been discussing this. If you look
yep,
through the TED Talk
agreed.
catalog for 2005, 2009, 2015, people have been talking about this and people have been saying, we need to implement better systems. We need to have a safety net. We need to safeguard our workers, so on and so forth. So yeah, it's a long-term issue. So we need to start getting ready for a very different world. Hopefully by the end of next year, we'll see some kind of change. But until then, I think we have to start learning to adapt very, very
Yeah,
quickly.
definitely. And I think you pretty much put a different thought in my head. So thank you so much for that. So like now I have a different way of looking at things. But it's also like I'm just thinking I should have made the extra effort of like thinking about it long term because we have technology in front of us. We have privilege of having the internet. Like I could have easily Googled and said, okay, if I do shout outs like this, not in that particular language of Googling, but like if people do this thing where they keep traveling around and delivering food, would it still cause a problem towards the pandemic, right? I should have done that, right? I have access to the information. Why didn't I do it, you know? And I'm glad that you brought this out. So, like, now I know when going forward, I shouldn't be doing that and I should be tackling it differently. I should be actually saying, hey, why don't you actually stay at home and try and help these families with actually income instead of getting them to get on the streets, you know? So,
Exactly.
like, I
Yeah.
love that you brought it up. So, I
Uh,
actually want to talk about, yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
I'm sorry, just to add to that, because I can't remember the source, but I read somewhere that lots of German or Finnish restaurants, what they're doing is they're doing the pay now, buy later system, where because they want to support these small businesses, what they're doing is they make a payment to that company, to that business, and the agreement is once all of this is over, we will take the goods from you. So just to keep the business running, it's like, okay, we've paid however many, amount of money and we want these items. Once everything is done, when, we can go out again, I will come and get them from you. So that is something. Oh, so my friend Manila is online and she just
I'm
mentioned
Manila.
that they Finland. So there we go. So they do it in Finland. And I think that's a good thing that we can start implementing. Businesses can start considering to do that. Yeah,
Amazing.
moving. Yeah. So that's one
Yeah, no,
solution.
absolutely. And I just want to touch on like proactiveness versus reactiveness in a globalization versus nationalism context. Because especially with countries like the US, they focus on a very nationalistic approach. Do you think that a very nationalistic approach in the long term, because a lot of countries are dependent on other countries for goods and services, they
Mhm.
can't produce their own goods in certain countries which they are dependent
Mhm.
on. So, like
Mhm.
when it comes to proactiveness versus reactiveness on a globalization and nationalistic context, do you think that being proactive also means practicing a more nationalistic approach from country to country and continent to continent?
That's a loaded question because I mean we have a very liberal market system, obviously, which is why for example, I have a friend who works in the automobile industry, and she was saying, when China shut down, they couldn't basically go on with some of their work just because they couldn't get the parts that they wanted, right? And these are countries that are miles apart, right? They're continents apart. So because of a very open liberal trading system, and because those markets are interconnected, on top of policies that are being implemented within countries, it's a bit of a mismatch. Like the world is in a very strange place right now. I mean, we saw a pattern of politics moving towards a more populist rhetoric a couple of months ago, and people were starting to think in a more inwardly sense. But at the same time, it's difficult to retain that because we have other systems around us that are focusing and are dependent on the globalization aspect, where we're so interconnected that we can't really abandon ourselves. Right now, from what I'm seeing, and this is from a very surface level aspect, there are lots of lessons learned that countries are sharing within themselves. And I mean, I don't think we can lose our dependence on each other in this current moment because a lot of aid, a lot of infrastructure, and a lot of support that's coming and going is because of the interconnectedness that we have. But I think when it comes to dealing with the situation within your borders, countries have to start to think about what works best within their, not only their region, but within their nation itself. Like, for example, in Sri Lanka, instead of a lockdown, we went straight into a curfew, right? And there are cultural, social reasons that kind of apply to it. Currently in the UK, we're in a lockdown, but because the weather's quite nice outside and people are taking this as a bit of a holiday, we're starting to see that people are straying away from the lockdown effect and they're going out to parks and all that kind of thing. So there's talks that a curfew is going to eventually happen as well. So just like you said before, we're still learning about this, right? And lots of countries are also still trying to wrap their heads around how they're going to deal with this best. The sad part is this will happen at the loss of several thousands of lives. That's the sad part. So it's a huge risk. This learning as you go process is a huge risk. You have countries like the UK where our prime minister is currently in hospital. So that leadership has kind of, there's a bit of an issue there. We're wondering what's going to happen. Will he have someone replace him? So on and so forth. Back in Sri Lanka, we're questioning whether or not the parliament needs to be convened. So every country has its little issues. From my opinion, and this can be disputed, of course, countries need to do what's best for their country. And nobody knows your country best than your own leader, right? But I would also say that although this will eventually lead to countries wanting to disconnect from the international sphere, that'll happen at a huge risk. It'll happen at a huge risk. We're all going to feel the negative impact of it. We're all going to suddenly be dependent on national systems, and we'll have to hope and pray that those systems are stable enough to deal with this sudden bulk of dependency. So I think that this is a question that's only going to be answered as we go along, and we're going to have to start to see how this kind of evolves. Something I love about the South Korean response, which isn't without its faults, of course, is because they went through SARS and MERS and all of that. They have a very active internal marketplace for vaccines and research on pandemics and viruses. So because so many companies were investing in this, the price ranges have fallen down drastically, and it's not like a huge investment for them to start doing these kind of things. But in Sri Lanka, will that be the same? Will it be the same in Australia? Will it be the same in India? See, those are problems. So when it comes to that, we'll have to start depending on external help without a doubt. But I will say that this is something we'll have to think about as we go along. It's very difficult to assess right now. I just think that countries need to stick to doing what works best within their perimeters and not try to emulate what other countries are doing, because there's so many factors that come into it, right? Population, availability of healthcare, communities. One of the biggest problems that pandemics bring, and historically this has also happened, is it creates a lot of communal division. And for a country like Sri Lanka, which can't seem to catch a break in terms of community consumption, because it's a civil war, and then it's a we have a communal, like an ethnic issue again, and then we have a terrorist attack, and then we just can't seem to catch a break. For countries like Sri Lanka, that is something that governments will have to start thinking about, because with pandemics come class divisions, come communal issues, and these are things that we have to start working on. And if our governments can't do that, then we certainly can. Uh, we certainly should. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think like you said, like power of the people, right? Like if you really have change makers within society, why wouldn't you take a step forward to like stand up and build a community around you and fight for what's right, basically? I know that sounds super cheesy, there's a lot to it, but it's what we need to do, especially with so many, we have so many change makers in Sri Lanka. If there's one thing that has shown me throughout all of these conversations, we have people that can make a difference.
Interestingly enough, interestingly enough, right? Change makers in Sri Lanka go beyond the internet platform. If you go into any village in Sri Lanka, if you move away from the perimeters of the metropolitan, you will find that youth groups in Sri Lanka are running their villages. They're establishing sports centers so kids can stop getting addicted to drugs and get involved in cooperative activities. They're working to bring electricity, computers to school.
Amazing.
The youth clubs in Sri Lanka at a grassroots level will drive this country. They are incredible. And for me, those are the change makers. I think the word change maker in this current context is just so distorted, because I think it's very easy for someone to give themselves the title of a change maker just because they made an inspirational speech, just because they were sponsored by X, Y, and Z to do this and that. No. I feel like change makers have existed. It's not a new thing. They've been there. They've been working quietly and with great limitation, right? And I think this is the time that people who have platforms outside the grassroots level use it to elevate them, use it to bring attention to those people. It's because they have bigger issues than we do right now. That's why I keep saying, if boredom is your biggest issue, you are so privileged, because there are people who can't go to work, who can't go to school, whose jobs cannot be on a work from home basis, So Sri Lanka has enough and more change makers. And the thing is, you won't see them. I won't see them. A majority of us won't see them. And the best part is, they don't care. They don't want to be seen. They are working and they're dedicating their lives to making sure that the small communities they are in are at the very least getting the basic necessities they need. And I think we can learn a lot from that. I think us as a community can learn a lot from that, because we're very lucky, we're very fortunate. You and I can connect. This is great. We can connect across countries. You've connected with so many other people. You brought their capacities to the forefront. We should keep doing that, because we're at a better position to do so. And recognizing that, I think there's a long way that we can take this. But you're very correct. Sri Lanka has an incredible number of change makers, and they're making waves at home, online, in other countries, and we shouldn't take that for granted. I need to mention this really quickly, because when I was at the UN and I was working for about close to a month there, and we were having all these discussions, and I was surrounded in a room of change makers, so to speak, from different countries. And everything they were saying and everything they were planning for, our kids were doing back at home. Sri Lankan youth were doing back at home. They had already done it. They had already seen the results of it, and maybe not at a grand scale. We don't have pomp and pageantry to broadcast it, but it's been happening. So I remember sitting in those meeting rooms, and like a small part of me was like, I am so proud of this country and its people. Because every time your heart drops seeing something terrible happening back at home, there's at least one other person or two or a group of people who are doing incredible things. So it's like Sri Lanka's a strange balance. At one minute you're like, oh my God, this is terrible, and all of a sudden you have like a young person coming up and being like, you know what, it's terrible, but we're not gonna let it stay that way. Um, Definitely a land of change makers, and that comes from being in a country that wasn't privileged to have peace and calm for a long time. So we underestimate the amount of stability we have. We underestimate how much we can withstand as young people. And I think all of us need to be reminded of that. I mean, I see that when I come here, because a lot of people I interact with, they're like, oh my God, this is such a huge problem. And then in my head, I'm like, no, it's not. There are bigger problems. We can deal with this. There is a solution to this. It's just a struggle, but there is a solution. And then in the back of my head, I'm like, oh my God, I think this way because years of conditioning, years of coming from a situation that wasn't great and having to make the best out of it. So Sri Lankan change makers, everyone watching this, we are very, very resilient. We have been through hell and we're still here. So please don't take that for granted, especially when it comes to this pandemic response. I was having this conversation with a friend the other day, and I was like, in our lifetime, in our less than 40 years of existence, we've been through so many shocks, civil war, tsunamis, flooding, so many shocks. And we're still here as a country. We're still pushing forward. So we definitely have the potential to push through this pandemic. It's just a matter of prioritizing and getting our affairs in order and just moving on, I think, personally. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sorry,
Literally, that was like,
I'm so sorry. I just went on such a tangent because I needed to say that. I
you have
needed to say
nothing to
that.
apologize for.
Okay.
That was like a TED talk, yo. Like, I am so proud to know you and like connect with you and have a chat with you because the way you articulate things is very, very good. For lack of like other words, right? Like, we
If
need
I
more
had
people
longer
like
hair and flipped hair, but I don't. So.
No, but like these are very important things. Like these are like you are very stern in how you on how you talk about things, but also you talk with facts and figures and like real things that are happening in Sri Lanka. Like all of these kids and all of these communities, all these youth in rural areas and other areas of Sri Lanka, they don't want the clout. They don't want attention. They're just
No.
doing it to help people around them. They're just doing it to make their community better. They are leaders that we should follow, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, we should.
So yeah, so like I just wanted to stop and say thank you for that.
No problem. Yeah,
But
just
like
just
speaking, oh yeah, absolutely. And speaking of like other problems, like you said, there are so many other problems we're dealing with, and some of the other problems that you personally tackle and you've been on panels for is like for women empowerment, for sexual harassment and stuff like that that happens in Sri Lanka.
Mhm.
Why are you so passionate about these things, and what can we do to make a difference in a community?
Mm, well, okay. So I guess I've had several turning points in my professional and personal life, and I think in my very early years of working, I remember I was taken to we were doing this project in Ratnapura, I think, and I remember so I was with so my team was predominantly male, and I was I think 25 years old, like just very excited, very eager to be in the field, and like I'm like, "Yeah, let's do this. So we go and like we're speaking to these communities, and the project had existed for about a year or so, and things were seemingly going fine, right? So we were doing the reports and things like that, and then there was a lady there, a beneficiary, and she came and spoke to me, and she was like, "This is the first time we've had a woman come in and speak to us, because thus far the project was run by men, right?" So I'm like, "Oh well, I'm new, and this is what this is," and then all of a sudden, a
Bye,
flurry of
Sharanya.
information.
Sorry, I have to say bye to Sharanya.
A flurry of information came out, the problems she was having because she couldn't tell it to my male colleagues because of social conditioning, because of stigma. There were so many things she couldn't tell them, which she should have told, which we needed to know for the project purposes, right? And I was sitting there like on the floor of this, essentially stick and mud house, and this woman was pouring her heart out to me, right? And it struck me so much that women just need that. I mean, I knew already that women needed representation. It was nothing new to me. I'd learned about it, I studied it, I believed in it. But that moment kind of struck. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, what are we doing? What are we not doing as people, as young people, who have a voice, who have a platform? And that kind of just like stuck with me, and I realized that I want to do these things. I want to ask these uncomfortable questions, and I want to bring it to the forefront, because there are people who can't, who don't have the voice to do so. And what you notice is people have all of these collective circles that they use to kind of protect their beliefs, protect their privilege. We need to break through these circles and kind of start asking the difficult questions. And we need to start realizing how our actions impact people who can't speak up against it, who have so much at stake that they can't take the risk to speak up against it. Do you know what I mean? And I think that really kind of hit me. Also, even before that, like I went to an all girls school, and I saw the way that gender worked, because we had a very restrictive sense of upbringing as Sri Lankan girls. And the way that systems were set up, the way that when I went to university, I had to do twice as much to make sure people paid attention to me. The way that when I started working, I had to do thrice as much to get people to notice me because I was younger and I was a girl. So those are very privileged, like minor struggles that all of us would have gone through. But then when you start seeing the bigger picture, you realize how much deeper this problem runs. And that is really what pushed me to do so. And I've also, because I mean, I have a part of me that's very creative, that's very artsy, which I don't exercise as much as I should. But I try to use that to connect with people and to connect my ideas, which is why I love doing campaigns. I loved having like all our advocacy work on print, colorful images, artwork, conversations. I love doing that, because for me, that was the perfect connect between creativity and art and public policy and the people. So it was a way of combining everything together. Um, and I've also been taught to value my voice, because for the longest time, it wasn't heard. And when I finally built up the capacity to be able to make myself heard, I told myself not to be obnoxious, but I'm not going to keep quiet. Like, I know when I should keep quiet, and I know when I shouldn't keep quiet. And that is the process I think all young women kind of get into, because right now there are movements that give us the confidence to believe in this. But I will say that, 5-10 years back, we didn't have the same kind of safety nets that the internet has allowed and created and propagated now. Because back in the day, I mean, I say this like I'm a grumpy old
I
person.
knew you were going to say
I
that.
say this like I have aged, but it is the truth. It is the truth, because we never had a body positivity movement. We never had women should speak up movement. But we see that now, and that's incredible, because that means that other people can. Oh, hi, Holika. Sorry, I can see the chat. um, uh, because that means that people can start quickening in their journeys. They don't have to go through that struggle. So I'm so happy that people are more vocal about these things now, specifically because we never really had that much of a powerful stance when we were starting out. And I think the main takeaway out of all of this is we're learning as we go. We're going to make mistakes. Let's be kind and understanding to one another. Let's reevaluate everything we say. If we make a mistake, let's own up to it. If we don't check our privilege, let's rewind a bit and start taking that into consideration, because we're human. We're going to make mistakes. you know but we need to create more self-awareness around those mistakes, and I think collectively that's how we're going to go forward, and it is
Beautiful.
why I do. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, and I completely agree, because that I have a single mom, like for
Yeah.
me, doing my part in my capacity is very important as well. And it's just the things that she has gone through, no one has to go through. And the
Mhm.
things that a lot of women go through, they don't have to go through. When I worked at
Mhm.
corporates, I worked at three corporates, and that was most of my work experience. I'll hopefully never work for a corporate ever again. But when I worked at those corporates, women were the hardest workers because they had to work 10 times harder just to prove themselves. And
Yeah,
that shouldn't be the case. Shouldn't be the
of course.
case.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
so many issues going on. So, like, I'm glad that you brought it up as well. So, I just have two more questions because I don't want to take too much of your time. You're a full-time student, and you are a
Yeah.
full-time nerd as well.
I
Um,
have no space now. Like I'm stuck with my book, so I can't even like space out anymore. I have to stick to
I
it.
know.
Yeah.
But just one question is, I want to get to know a personal side of you, in the
Hmm.
sense where you're doing so much thought in all of these issues, right? You're doing so much reading on all of these issues. You've been in organizations and run campaigns for these issues.
Hmm.
Has it personally affected you to a level where you're just like, this is too much? Like, this is too much for me to like take in mentally.
No, no. Um, it's really interesting because yesterday somebody had tweeted something about what is the most painful physical injury you've ever received? And I talked about, I'm not going to talk about that, but like and I was thinking to myself, oh my God, I went through so much physical pain. Like, am I unstoppable? Like, no, I'm joking. But the point is, no. The simple question would be, the simple answer would be no. I mean, it's taxing. But something I've learned as we grow up and as we take in more responsibility is yes, we have to be kind to ourselves. Yes, we have to be aware of our mental health. I'm not saying overwhelm yourself to a point where you're a brick and you're like, nothing's going to affect me, nothing's cracking this wall. No, you're going to have some cracks. But I think it's also up to you to build up resilience to that. And if we keep on starting to fall back every time we get a hard hit, no one is going to move forward. And I think that's the problem. I think what we need to start talking about is not that you won't get hit, not that everything is going to be rosy and fine. No. But we have to start building people's confidence that in the case you get hit hard, in the case that things aren't great, you are going to be able to bounce back. It's going to be difficult. You'll have to work on yourself. It won't happen overnight, but you can. It's possible. And the more we start generating that kind of response to the physical and emotional strains that we're going to start experiencing, I feel like people are going to want to push themselves more and do more with what they can. Because, I mean, you know this as well. I mean, I've listened to your talks and stuff. The biggest thing holding you back is your own capacity to deny what you're capable of doing. Like you get one negative comment, you get one critical, opinion thrown towards you, and suddenly you're like, oh my God, like how do I overcome this? It's not about how do I overcome this. It's more along the lines of I will overcome this, but what do I do to overcome this? So we need to change our approach to this kind of thing. And I know I've worked with women, I've worked with other people, men, women both, who've seen worse in real life, who've experienced worse in real life, who've gone through things a lot worse and are still out there, still going to work, still putting a smile on your face. And you start to think about how are these people so resilient? Like how do they manage? It's because we can't keep digging that black hole deeper and deeper every time something bad happens to us, or we're never going to get out. You know, the escape route is up, it's not down. And the more we work our way up, the less we see the problems holding us back. So, to answer your question, no. Um, I mean, personally, I've been through quite a bit and I've seen quite a bit and I've experienced quite a bit. And I can talk about it for lengths and lengths, but it's not going to help me. It's not going to help you. It's not going to help somebody who's had worse. So what I do is I don't give things that hold me back space in my mind. I don't give anxieties, I don't give bad mental health days, I don't give them the privilege of being a part of my life. They come up, I acknowledge it, fine, we're done. your importance in my day is not, it's irrelevant, you're not important. I'll have another bad day. I'll have a stream of bad days. I'll be like, okay, bad day, this happened, fine, we're done. Let's move on. Let's keep moving. Let's keep going. Because I feel like a lot of people, and I see this a lot, and it's very unhealthy. And I'm sure if friends who are watching who are working in psych and understand the human psyche better than I do, can attest to this. I despise it when people romanticize on mental issues, and I despise it when people use that as an excuse to be nasty, to gain sympathy, to use that as your brand, or to use that as what represents you. I understand that it's a very difficult process and people go through it and we suffer from it, right? But don't give it that importance and don't let it define who you are. It shouldn't be your identity. It should be part of your struggle. It should be part of why you become a better person at the end of it all. But do not let it be your identity and don't give it that value. You know, it doesn't deserve you. It does not deserve you. And you don't deserve to have it. So I would say no.
Amazing. Amazing. That's crazy. Like, I want to actually ask you, like, right before I ask my last question, which you know what it is. But like, well, when I ask you, you'll be like, oh, that one. But like, no, like, do you think that? Because I'm learning more about myself every single day, right? I know that mental health is going to be a part of my life going forward, but I'm learning how to deal with it, which is what I talk about. Like, I take action. You know, there's acceptance, there's realization, and there's action. But it has become a part of my identity as well. Like, for the fact that I use it as like content where I'm motivating people to say, look, I am just like you. I have these anxious episodes. I have these panic attacks. But look, I'm pushing forward. I'm pushing forward as much as I can. So do you think like I'm using it as an excuse?
No, I think you're using it as an example. And I think people need to see more of that. I don't know if you've done this, but there used to be this phase where whenever people were feeling demotivated, they'd go onto YouTube and they'd Google motivational stories and they'd watch like a 10-minute, like a video about an athlete or a famous politician who had a really bad childhood and then worked their way towards it. And like finally there was a Coach Carter quote at the end of the video and we'd be like, oh my God, I'm so motivated. Why do we do that? Why do we look to other people? Because we kind of want to reconfirm within ourselves, okay, if that person did it, then so can I.
Right? Relatability and normalization.
Exactly. So sometimes we tend to look at real life examples to validate our own fears and tell ourselves, they did it, so can I. Right? And I'm going to disagree with you. I don't think your mental health struggles are your branding. I think your mental health struggles created a platform for you to get over it and tell people that they can do the same. So your branding is really not that. I think your branding is more along the lines of being empowered and making the best out of a situation. So I'm going to disagree with you on that. Because there are people who like properly use mental health as an excuse to be a terrible, terrible people. And while we have to obviously empathize and try to understand and help them, I don't think it does them or anyone else any favors either. Whereas in your case, you're talking more about how you have XYZ happen to you, how that has brought you down in the past, but you're actively doing something. And I don't know if you reached a point in your journey where you can finally say, you know what, I'm fine, I'm great, but at the very least, you're taking people along with you on that journey. And that's a pretty bold thing to do because not everyone is willing to share those kind of things, right? People are very introverted in the way they share what they're going through, and especially Sri Lankans, because we never want to say that there's something wrong. It's always like, no, it's fine, everything's good, I'm good, everything's great. But the fact that you have the ability to kind of open up about that and share, and in return, obviously be criticized and both criticized and commended for it is huge. So don't deny yourself that. But also at the same time, I don't think it should encourage anyone to use it as a crux. Use it as something that motivates you to do better.
Absolutely. I didn't ask that question with any sort of validation, like need of validation. I was just curious.
I just added that validation for you. That's my thank you to you.
No, yeah, absolutely. I think I just wanted your perspective on it because I feel like you have very, very good ways of articulating. But yeah, my last question before I let you go is a very
Mhm.
simple question. It's
Mhm.
You can go into as short as you want, as long as you want. But the show is called Going Live for Kindness. So I just want to know what kindness means to you in your life.
Mhm. So I was listening to, okay, I knew this question was coming up. I heard Senel's answer to it, and I thought his answer was beautiful, which is when you do something for somebody without expecting anything in return, which I think that's beautiful, especially when you know that that person can't. But for me, kindness, and I've discovered this as I've gone along, is kindness is giving people the time and being able to listen. Because I feel like we do a lot of hearing, but we're not really listening to what people are saying. And maybe that's because of the work that I've done, but it's just that I feel like giving people space and valuing people and giving them that time and actually listening to them is the kindest thing you can do. Because we live in a world that is so hectic and so demanding that it's very easy to be selfish in our responses towards things, and we don't stop to listen to people. But and you know this well better than I, because as an advocate for better mental health, I'm sure you realized, and I've seen from like some of the DMs and stuff that you get, people just need to be heard, right? They just need to know that someone will listen, and that's the reason why people message you and say, "Oh, I watched this, and this is what I felt, and I felt like I was heard. I felt like someone was actually listening to me," um, which again connects with my attitude towards being a voice, because sometimes that helps people being who feel like they're not being heard feel like they've been heard, right? And listened to, you know. So for me, kindness is listening and being patient with people and understanding that there's more than one perspective towards things, and your perspective could be wrong, and listening and hearing why it's wrong and understanding why it's wrong and working through that. So for me, kindness would be, I would take kindness to be just listening, just listen to people, and that is kindness to me. Because it's like the classical thing where, and you see this in lots of like organizations when they're doing disaster relief packages and stuff, and they're so kind because they put everything into it and they're like, here are all these essential items you need, but they didn't listen, so they didn't realize that sometimes women need specific things in these disaster relief packs. So you're being kind, all the effort is there, but you weren't paying attention, so you didn't know exactly what was needed. So that's where listening comes in. I think we should all be better listeners, and talkers, but mostly listeners. Like
Amazing. I think
owls. Sorry, I
I
love.
think there's a difference between listening and active listening. And listening takes a lot more effort, but if you do put
Of
in the effort,
course.
you comfort a lot of people around you, and you can solve a lot more issues because you do.
Yeah.
So lovely. Like every single person I've spoken to has a slight different interpretation of kindness, which is beautiful in itself.
Hmm, hmm.
So I just want to say what a humble opportunity it has been to finally
Oh,
meet you. I've been following you for like the longest time,
yeah,
but like
same.
finally, yeah, you literally finally virtually meeting you,
Yeah.
getting to talk to you, and just like I feel like I'm just like I feel hopeful after this conversation, to say the least.
Oh my
And
God,
like
that's so nice. That's so nice.
no, seriously,
That's great.
like thank you so much for making the time. I'm sure you would have had a busy schedule as well, especially with like everything is like online now, so you just feel super switched on. Well,
Yeah.
most of the time. I don't feel switched on all the time, but yeah, that's just
No, I
me.
can,
Um,
with 4 hours of sleep and no coffee, I don't know how you're running, dude. Like, props to
oh,
you. I
yo,
have no
I'm
idea.
ready to go.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for taking the time. Like, seriously, this has been quite an enlightening and eye opening conversation. And this is the type of conversations we need more. We don't need shouting, we need intellectual arguments and discussions. So, thank you so much. The internet is yours. Do you want to leave us with any final thoughts and any projects that you're working on and where we can find you on social media?
Really quickly, hi Janet. Really quickly, I just want to tell everybody who's kind of tuned in right now. Firstly, thank you for taking the time. I know it's lunchtime back at home, and most of you must be focusing on what you're going to eat,
Um,
which is great.
1 second. So Instagram
Yeah.
is going to cut us off. I'm going to call you back. Okay?
Oh,
Because
okay.
we have
Okay.
only
Cool.
1 hour. So guys, just literally tune in right back into this story. Just refresh the page and we'll be back in like 10 seconds.
Okay. Cool.